everyone, and welcome back for another episode of Reactive Dog Chats. Today, what I'm doing is going over some of the questions that you all have submitted over the past couple of weeks. So, today we're going to talk about why dogs are reactive, barking in the car, fear aggression, and more. So, stay tuned. Have you signed up for the Distracted Dog Reset yet? In this free training course, we'll coach you through teaching your dog 3 new skills. Then, you'll be able to use these to get your dog's attention in distracting or triggering situations. We'll focus on teaching you the emergency U-turn, eye contact, and the go sniff cue. And best of all, it's completely free. Head on over to redpointydog.com/distracteddog to sign up today. So our first question is, my dog seems to bark at other dogs out of fear. She acts like she wants to kill your dog at a distance, but once up close, she just wants to play. Can any of you guys relate? Why does my dog do this? Well, first of all, fear can lead to aggression, and it often does. That's a number one reason why a lot of dogs develop aggression is because they are afraid. Now, when a dog experiences fear of a trigger, like dogs or even people, and it continues to grow, meaning it doesn't improve, most dogs will eventually develop an action plan to help them feel more comfortable about the situation that they're in. And aggressive displays work really well. When a dog barks and lunges, the outcome is usually that the dog is fine. The trigger goes away, a greeting doesn't happen, those kinds of things. Now, most reactive dogs are actually dog social, okay? I'm going to say something like 75% of the reactive dogs I work with live with another dog, go to doggy daycare. They do fine with certain friends in the neighborhood, just not every dog in the neighborhood or every person in the neighborhood. They're just too nervous and conflicted about how to say hello and to do it safely. And honestly, that's not really a surprise, given that most dogs are forced to greet other dogs on a leash. And that's not really appropriate for 2 dogs to come nose to nose and hash it out when confined on a 6-foot line attached to a nervous human. Of course, they're going to develop some fear or anxiety because of that. The other thing I see is when on-leash dogs are walking and off-leash dogs charge them. Now, yeah, off-leash dog is more than likely social, but they're probably a little overly social and potentially a little inappropriate. And even if that dog's intentions are good, it can be really scary to the dog who's on a leash and confined with nowhere to run away to or to avoid the scary oncoming dog. So a lot of dogs develop this aggression on a leash because they're just conflicted and they don't really know what to do. And in the past, they've had some uncomfortable encounters. It doesn't have to lead to a dog fight. They just have to be uncomfortable enough that your dog found it unpleasant. Now, the risk here of you having a reactive dog and letting them go say hello and then they're fine is that that other dog might not be okay with your dog's behavior. That other dog may be young, vulnerable, older, painful, and regardless, it could very well end in a dog fight, and then you have a bigger problem on your hands. So we want to keep in mind your dog's safety, but the other dog's safety as well, and the people. If there's a dog fight, you're going to have to break that up. That's not good. Okay. Now, the other dog may handle it fine, but then we also have to consider, well, is that dog nervous of your dog now because your dog came in a little hot, right? A little loud, a little boisterous in a way that may potentially make other dogs feel uncomfortable or unsafe. The other last piece I want to make sure that you guys all understand is that behavior is reinforced naturally through rehearsal. So let's say your dog is barking, lunging, screaming, snarling, snapping even, and then they get to go say hello to a dog and it ends well. What's the consequence for your dog? They learn that by barking and carrying on, they get to be social and friendly at the end. And some dogs are reactive simply because they desperately want to say hello, and they'll bark and they'll lunge and they'll flip on their leash and they'll pull as hard as they possibly can until they say hello and then they get their needs met. But that's not okay. It's not okay because you don't want your dog dragging you across the street into oncoming traffic to greet other dogs. It's not safe for you. It's not safe for them. But also, it's not okay to allow your dog to greet another dog unless you know it's okay with that dog and that dog's person. Okay. So we shouldn't be letting dogs greet other dogs simply because they want to. So we have to be careful that we're not inadvertently reinforcing your dog's behavior by allowing them to rehearse it. I hope that helped. If you have follow-up questions, I'll be sure to check for you in the comments below. All right. Our next question is, why does my dog bark at people when riding in the car? Ooh, this is a good question. So first of all, I have some follow-up questions. So hopefully you're listening and you can answer them in the comments for me. But my first question would be, does riding in the car make your dog already anxious, stressed, or even sick? If that's the case, then we may be dealing with something called trigger stacking, where if your dog is already not feeling super great about being in the car, their stress kind of spills over, kind of like a pot of water boiling over on the stove. They go over their threshold because they're already at their threshold because they're not feeling well. And so they may be fixating on things outside of the car just as a way to cope with the discomfort that they're experiencing. The other thing is that sometimes it's a learned behavior, that being in the car may be arousing for them, or maybe not, but they see people go by and maybe that makes them frustrated. Maybe they want to say hello. Maybe that makes them nervous. Maybe they don't like people. So they bark, and eventually that person goes away, or you drive your dog away. Okay. So again, just like we talked about with the earlier question, there's reinforcement to this behavior. And if your dog continues to practice it, they're going to continue to do it in the future, right? Because reinforcement leads to increased behavior in the future. The other thing is that it can be fun for some dogs to just bark in the car. I have known clients whose cars have wear marks in the seat because the dog is running back and forth, barking out the window, and they're just having a jolly good time. This isn't okay, regardless of why your dog is doing it, because it is so very unsafe. I won't tell you any horror stories, but suffice it to say that dogs should really be confined in the car in a way that keeps them safe, okay? Now, I have my dogs ride in the car in a crate so that I can cover that crate with a sheet and then they can't see out. That's good for me because I don't want my dogs to get hurt in an accident. So we use rough land kennels. So if we do get hit, the dogs are as safe as they possibly can be. Okay. But if a crate in your car isn't an option, you could use a seatbelt. And if your dog really can be in a crate, but maybe you have a sedan, you can't put a big crate in there, you could just use a canvas pop-up crate and have your dog ride in it, because that will minimize their visual access out the window. But keep in mind that they aren't as safe in there as they would be in a solid crate. But window barking in the car is super common. I mean, walk into the grocery store and you'll hear a million dogs barking at you when you're walking by. It's common. It happens all the time because there's people walking by cars all of the time. The best way to solve it is with good management, like a crate covered with a sheet. All right. And our last question for today's episode is, my dog is amazing. We can take her anywhere and do anything. That's awesome. Except walk around our neighborhood. The insane lunging and barking if we see another dog is crazy, even if she sees one out of our window, but only some. Others don't get any reaction other than watching. Is she resource guarding her house or her territory? This is such a good question. And there's going to be a number of answers to this because it really does depend on the dog and your individual case. So hopefully you can tell me in the comments below if you have any feedback, or if this sounds like a familiar story for anyone else, feel free to chat me up in the comments. Be happy to talk with you more. But the first thing I'll say is that dogs behave worse in the places they feel the most comfortable. So dogs will inhibit their behavior or inhibit their choices if they're in a location where they don't feel as safe or as confident. So I'll give you an example. My dog Monzo, during the pandemic, he had to go into a specialty hospital and I couldn't go in with him. And so I had to hand him over to a technician in the parking lot and try not to cry my eyes out. And I said, he's reactive to dogs. Please watch out for other dogs. And on their way into the facility, a pit bull jumped out of the car on a leash with her people. Wasn't a bad dog, but really close to Monzo. And Monzo looked at it and kept walking. So that doesn't mean that Monzo's reactive because of me. It means that Monzo wasn't reactive in that situation because he felt unsafe and he didn't feel comfortable enough to defend himself because he didn't have backup. He didn't have me with him. He wasn't in a familiar location. He was scared. Another example of this is at the vet. A lot of dogs will be taken out back because they do better. And I'm not saying anything about anyone, but a lot of dogs will do better because they're afraid. They'll inhibit their choices because mom or dad isn't around and they aren't feeling as safe. Another example of this is, when I was a child and I'd go to my grandparents' house, I was the picture of a perfect child, but I unfortunately can tell you that I was not at home. Where kids feel safest, they are themselves, and where maybe they don't have that backup or that extra support, they behave a little bit better, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. Again, questions, tell me in the comments. So that could be part of it, that your dog maybe only feels super safe and confident at home and in their neighborhood. If that doesn't sound like your dog, if you still think that they're really comfortable and confident out in the world, then my next thought would be maybe something happened in your neighborhood that your dog has hung on to. Dogs in the neighborhood or people, I think it was dogs. Dogs in the neighborhood are scary. Dogs out of the neighborhood, they're totally fine. So, I have clients who, when they're walking their dog, a dog could charge them on an invisible fence and scare the daylights out of their dog. There's no fight, but simply having a dog scare your dog on a walk is enough for them to develop leash reactivity, in particular at home and in your neighborhood. That single event of a dog barking and charging yours on a walk is enough to create a great deal of anxiety, especially because A, you never know when that dog's going to be out, and B, you never know if the fence is on. And sure, your dog may not realize that, but we know the invisible fence is there. Your dog doesn't. So that dog's coming charging at you, and then all of a sudden, maybe they stop, and your dog is like, holy Moses, I thought I was going to get killed today. And even though maybe your dog isn't freaking out every time they see a dog, in the neighborhood, they may have a significantly increased anxiety because they're anticipating something like that. And if that doesn't sound like your dog, that doesn't mean that's not what's happening, because we have to really think of it from the dog's perspective. Something that's scary to us might not be scary to your dog, and something that's scary to your dog might not be scary to you, and you might not even notice it or realize it. The last thing I'll say on this topic is that sometimes trauma from a situation doesn't show up until a few days or even weeks later. So there are cases I've worked where a dog witnessed a dog fight at the dog park, and they could go back to the dog park the next day and they're fine. And the next day they're fine. Go on walks around dogs, they're fine. And a couple weeks later, the dog started getting nervous about other dogs. It sometimes takes time for that to kind of take hold in our dogs. Now, the last thing to consider is that, yes, maybe your dog is behaving a little territorial, or maybe they're guarding their property a little bit. Again, it really does depend on the dog and their body language. So if your dog is in the early stages of reactivity, sometimes we may see some more fear-based body language. And if your dog is behaving more territorially, we may still see fear-based body language. But if they've been practicing it a lot, we may see more confident body language where the dog is leaning forward a little bit more. That isn't really a great way to discern why your dog is the way they are if they've been practicing this for a long time. So I'd love to hear your feedback. If you're listening, feel free to drop comments down below. I'd be happy to chat with you more about this. These were great questions, you guys. Thank you so much for submitting these. If you have questions about your dog's behavior, I want to answer them. So comment them down below and I'll be sure to get to them in our next Q&A episode. Thanks so much for joining me today. I hope you learned something. Tell your dog I said hello, give them a treat from me, and I'll see you guys again next time. Bye for now.